On December 7th, 1941, at 8 minutes past 8 in the morning, a single armor-piercing bomb dropped from a Japanese aircraft punched through the deck of the USS Arizona and detonated inside the forward ammunition magazine. The explosion that followed was visible from miles away. The ship lifted bodily out of the water, collapsed back down, and sank in less than 9 minutes. 1,177 men died. Nearly half of every American killed at Pearl Harbor that morning died on one ship in one explosion in under 9 minutes. I'm Jack, and what I want to talk about today is what happened after that, because the Arizona did not disappear. It sank in 40 feet of water, and it has been sitting there ever since. Above it, since 1962, there is a memorial. Below it, the hull is still there, still slowly collapsing, still leaking oil into the harbour every single day. And the reason it is still there is not what most people assume. The decision to leave it was not obvious. It was not inevitable. And 80 years later, it is creating a problem that nobody has a clean answer for. The Arizona was commissioned in 1916, a Pennsylvania-class battleship constructed at the Brooklyn Navy Yard. By the standards of 1941, she was not the newest ship in the fleet, but she was fully operational, and she was fully fueled. That last part matters enormously. The day before the attack, the Arizona had been topped off. Her fuel tanks were loaded with approximately 1.5 million gallons of bunker C fuel oil, a thick, heavy grade used by capital ships. When the magazine explosion tore the forward third of the ship apart, it did not consume those fuel tanks. They went to the bottom of Pearl Harbor largely intact, with most of that oil still inside them. The fire that followed the explosion burned for 2 days. Survivors in the water found themselves swimming through a 6-inch thick layer of burning oil on the surface. The USS Nevada, moored nearby, got underway specifically to avoid the oil drifting toward her. Rescue boats worked for hours trying to reach men trapped inside the hull. Eventually, the fires burned themselves out, and the Arizona settled into the harbor mud with hundreds of men still entombed inside her. Within weeks, Navy divers were already down there. They were not there to mourn. The United States had just entered a war, and it needed every piece of usable material it could find. Divers began removing documents, valuables, and sensitive equipment almost immediately. Survey teams assessed whether the ship could be raised and returned to service. What they found ended that conversation permanently. The forward magazine explosion had not just sunk the ship, it had broken the keel. The hull was cracked below the mudline. The structural damage was so catastrophic that raising the Arizona would have required more resources than the Navy could justify for a ship commissioned in 1916 that could never fight again. In December 1942, the Arizona was formally struck from the Naval Vessel Register. She was no longer a commissioned warship, she was debris. But she was also a grave. More than 900 men were still inside her. Divers had recovered approximately 105 bodies in the immediate aftermath, but the rest were unreachable. The Navy made a decision, which was really not much of a decision at all given the circumstances, to leave them where they were. The Arizona became simultaneously a piece of scrap metal and a military cemetery. Over the following years, the gun turrets were removed, the superstructure was stripped down to the main deck, and the rest was left alone. A concrete memorial was built across the hull in 1962, spanning the wreck but not touching it, so that 1.7 million visitors per year could stand above the ship without standing on it. Here is what most visitors do not know, and what I find genuinely unsettling when I think about it. Those 1.5 million gallons of fuel oil did not go anywhere. They are still in there. After 80 years of corrosion, the tanks have been slowly leaking. Not catastrophically, slowly. About 7 to 9 quarts of oil seep up to the surface of Pearl Harbor every single day. Locals call them the black tears of the Arizona. If you visit the memorial and look down at the water, you can see the iridescent sheen on the surface. It is visible from the ferry. It has been visible every single day since 1941. Scientists at the National Institute of Standards and Technology built a detailed computer model of the ship's midsection in 2006, simulating decades of seawater exposure and structural deterioration. Their conclusion was that the steel hull would remain largely intact for at least another 100 years. That sounds reassuring until you think about what it actually means. It means the Arizona is not going anywhere. The oil is going to keep leaking. And the National Park Service estimates at the current rate that oil could continue seeping out for another 500 years. The environmental question is not comfortable. A federal study found that Bunker C fuel oil, the specific grade in the Arizona's tanks, is particularly toxic to marine life. Between 14,000 and 64,000 gallons have already leaked into Pearl Harbor since 1941. The National Park Service monitors the hull with licensed divers who measure the deterioration rate of the fuel tanks on a regular basis. The concern is not the slow leak. The concern is what happens if the hull accelerates its collapse and the leak becomes something else entirely. There is no plan to pump out the oil. The Navy has determined that attempting to remove it would require disturbing the wreck, which is federally protected as a military cemetery. The oil stays in. The monitoring continues. The sinking itself is also literal, not just metaphorical. The USGS, in collaboration with the National Park Service, conducted investigations in 2002, 2003, and 2005 specifically to measure the hull's movement. Their published findings confirmed that since December 7, 1941, the hull of the USS Arizona has been slowly but steadily disappearing further below the surface of Pearl Harbor. The harbor floor beneath the hull is composed partly of soft grey clay. The ship is pressing into it, millimetre by millimetre, year by year. The wreck is not static, it is moving. And then there is the question of who is still inside it. The figure of 900 men entombed in the hull is the one most people know. What fewer people know is that the number has been growing. Since 1982, the Navy has offered Arizona survivors the option to be interred inside the wreck when they die. A Navy diver carries the urn of cremated remains down to the hull and places it inside the well of the 4th barbette turret, where it will remain alongside the men who died on December 7th. Of the 334 sailors who survived the sinking of the Arizona, 44 have chosen to return this way. Lauren Bruner, who was 21 years old when he became the second to last man to escape the burning ship, lived to be 98. He came back. His ashes were placed inside the Arizona in December 2019, and it was the last such ceremony. The 3 surviving Arizona veterans at the time decided to be buried with their families instead. The wreck today is structurally weaker than it has ever been. The steel is corroding. The platforms bolted to the hull during the 1942 salvage operations have been partially collapsing and were still being assessed and removed as recently as 2025. The Navy has described the Arizona as an ongoing preservation challenge with no straightforward solution. You cannot raise it. You cannot pump out the oil. You cannot move it. The men inside it cannot be disturbed. The memorial above it cannot be relocated. So the monitoring continues, the oil continues to rise, and the hull continues to sink slowly into the harbour mud. The same 40 feet of water it has been sitting in since a Sunday morning in 1941, when the whole thing was over in 9 minutes. Winston Churchill called the attack on Pearl Harbor the most stunning surprise in history. The Arizona is still there because there was never a version of events where it was not going to be. It sank too fast, broke too completely, and became too sacred too quickly. And now, 80 years on, it is protected by federal law, monitored by divers, studied by geologists, and visited by nearly 2 million people every year who look down through the water at the hull and see the oil rising toward them, and understand, maybe for the first time, that December 7, 1941 is not entirely in the past.